Good morning. I'm Alicia Ozier, the event specialist at the Chamber. Welcome to the Cannabis and Economic Buzz webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by the generosity of the Wagner firm. I'd like to ask Mark Wagner, Senior Associate, to offer remarks on behalf of the Wagner firm. Mark?
Thank you, Alicia. As Alicia said, my name is Mark Wagner. I'm a Senior Associate at the Wagner firm. First, I'd like to thank the Chamber for putting this event on, my fellow panelists for taking the time to present at this event, and the attendees for attending the event. The Wagner firm is a business law firm located in Albany. In our cannabis practice, we counsel clients in CBD and industrial hemp, and now clients who intend on applying for adult use marijuana licenses. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to sponsor and participate in this event. First, because we believe events like this facilitate the objective of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act to give victims of the war on drugs a second chance, and New York businesses an opportunity to transition their trajectory of their business by either directly participating in this cannabis industry or providing supporting services to the industry. We hope that this information that you're provided here today allows you the opportunity to do just that, and we hope you find it informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Now on to the program. You may ask questions anytime by utilizing the Q&A feature on your toolbar. Questions will be answered at the conclusion of the discussion. Christine Nealon will be the moderator today. Christine is the CEO of TRIP and RCHR. Christine is also a Chamber board member and chair of the Program and Events Committee. Christine, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia. I really find it a privilege to participate in this panel, and I've learned so much already just spending the time preparing for this with our amazing panelists. I'd like to take a second and reflect on what TRIP and RCHR do that is consistent with this type of panel. Through a continuum of housing and leadership opportunities, we ensure that residents are driving the community's economy as home and business owners, customers, employers, mentors, employees, and investors. With that, it makes perfect sense that we would be interested in this kind of topic, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this. So without further ado, I'd like to begin the introductions of these amazing panelists. I'd invite Damian Fagan, the board member of New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association, along with a number of other pretty impressive credentials, to introduce himself. Damian.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Thank you to the Chamber for having me. Much appreciated. These conversations are very important, and I'm glad to be part of this one. My name is Damian Fagan. I am a board member with the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. I'm also a former hemp farmer from the Hudson Valley, recovering hemp farmer actually, and I now teach cannabis horticulture at a community school here in the city, and work launching a workforce development initiative around cannabis with a nonprofit in the South Bronx called the Hope Program.
Great. Thank you so much, Damian. And next up, I'd like Tyler Culberson from NAI Platform to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So I want to thank everybody for attending today's panel, and thank my fellow panelists and Alicia for helping organize everything. And again, my name is Tyler Culberson with NAI Platform. I'm a commercial real estate broker here in the Capital Region, originally born and raised in Rensselaer County, and do a lot of work for new industrial development throughout the county, bringing a number of different warehouse distribution type users to the county. So this evolution of cannabis has been interesting to follow, and just interesting to see how it might be a real economic opportunity for the county for some of the more rural areas for the outdoor growth, and then also for warehouse distribution type facilities.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyler. And Matt, Managing Director with UHY.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, thank you for having me today. Yeah, my name is Matt Vanderbeck, and I'm a partner at UHY. I have about more than 25 years of public accounting experience, and I am part of a national team that we have at UHY that focuses on cannabis. I happen to lead up the region that's in the Hudson Valley. I sit in Hudson and the Capital Region, and also I'm also a member of the Growers and Processors Association, as well as the Hudson Valley, New York City Cannabis Industry Association. I sit on two committees of the New York State Society of CPAs for cannabis and banking. And I sit on the board of a community bank. So I think I have the perspective that I've had, which has been helpful, is combining the banking and the accounting. And I'm learning a lot really from the industry association experience that I've been participating in for people who really are out there in the cannabis industry and have done it before. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mark, well, we've already heard from you during your sponsor remarks. Is there anything you'd like to add to your introduction?
No, that's that. I'm I'm a lifelong Rensselaer County resident and grandson and nephew of a very local dairy farm in Rensselaer County, which can benefit from this emerging cannabis industry. So it's very personal to me that we are able to do events like this. So appreciate that.
Thank you so much. So as you can see, we're going to learn a lot from these panelists. And I want to contextualize the beginning of our conversation with a piece of our history, which seems like it was yesterday, but almost a year ago, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, or the MRTA, was signed into law on March 31st of 2021. It legalized adult use cannabis, also known as marijuana or recreational marijuana, in New York State. And the legislation created a new Office of Cannabis Management, or the OCM, governed by a cannabis control board to be comprehensively regulating adult use medical and hemp cannabis. So in the context of this policy change, there has been and continues to be a flurry of activity. So I'd like to start out with the question, why cannabis and why now? Damian, do you want to get?
Yeah, why cannabis and why now? No, it's an interesting question because when you look at the map, New York is actually surrounded by states that have already legalized and in some cases have thriving industries. And I think one of the most fascinating things to me about cannabis is who has legalized first and where are they legalizing first. And if you look at the states that legalized, close to 10 years ago at this point, a lot of them don't have the kind of very difficult history with criminal justice and race that the plant has on the East Coast, especially in a place like New York and New York City. You look at Colorado, Washington, Vermont, Oregon, these states, it wasn't politicized in the way that it was in New York. And that's, for good reason. There were a lot of people who had their lives ruined over this plant. And so it's a very emotional topic. And so when former Governor Cuomo, signed that bill, a lot of us in the cannabis activist community were not expecting that to move as quickly as it did. Because this is such a tough conversation that New York has been kicking down the road for so long. But now, the way the conversation is moving statewide around the plant, a lot of people are learning very quickly and unlearning maybe some past stigmas they had around their thoughts around the plant. But really, it's transitioned from, and I do think the state is doing this perfectly. They're wrapping, cannabis legalization and a regulated market in, within the confines of economic development for upstate and downstate and criminal justice reform and an empowerment for those that, that spent time behind bars for this plant. And so I think the state's doing a really good job of, walking that tightrope and doing it in only the way New York knows how to do it.
I also think with the governor coming out recently and really making it a point that is a priority of hers in the upcoming year, and talking about how it's going to be rolled out, establishing the control board. The control board has been active. The amount of activity has really ramped up since she has come on board. And I think that's giving everyone a sense of urgency to start to act and move, where I think when I've talked to people over the last year, a lot of people have been on the side kind of wait and see, but it seems that there's been acceleration of the process.
Mark, you referenced in the beginning some of the legal structures that have been in place in New York and at the federal level that have impacted this. What is your perspective on how this may change, the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's going to destigmatize, your participation in cannabis, whereas before, when they were criminally prosecuting those who were participating in the industry, they were putting roadblocks up, so to speak, from people accessing, cannabis. Now that states are legalizing the use of it, whether it's medical or recreational, it's more tolerable, in society and at the government level. And specifically in New York, there's been a priority to give opportunity to New York residents and businesses, and those that have seen the consequences of being criminally prosecuted for their participation, giving them the opportunity to participate and, see financial success.
Great, thank you. And Tyler, what are you seeing the impact around the commercial space that you're operating in?
Yeah, so I mean, so far, obviously, not many facilities have been committed to, but we've just seen a lot of speculation at this point. So in an industrial market that is as hot as ever, we've kind of focused on other states at this point that have successfully rolled out the recreational component and seen what they've done. And I've spoken to my counterparts in other states like Colorado, and just heard stories about kind of the broader economic impact. So I'm probably getting a phone call at least once a week from groups that are somewhere in the supply chain of the recreational cannabis. And it'll be interesting to see what the next 12 to 24 months hold in terms of actual commitments, whether it be on the retail side, whether it's on the grow side or processing side. So it'll be interesting to see the overall supply chain.
And we've talked a lot about the geography of the entire state and its proximity to the surrounding states, which are a little bit ahead of us. Let's talk specifically about Rensselaer County. Rensselaer County, why here? What's really unique about our proximity to the supply chain and the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think, this goes to something that the New York Growers and Processors Association is all about, and something that we've been talking about, for the last year, is that, this opportunity connects the cities of New York and, rural upstate New York in ways that no other commodity crop has ever done before. Everything that's, every part of the cannabis supply chain has to take place in New York. All the packaging, all of the manufacturing, all the cultivation, the delivery, the logistics, it cannot leave state lines. So in a lot of cases, some of the farmers I've worked with in the Hudson Valley and talked to, they're competing with vegetable farmers in Connecticut, Jersey, and that drives the price down. And that honestly, it has, hurt the dairy industry like we've seen and hurt other industries. But this one is for New York. The only people who can grow and process and extract and package a product that's sold in Times Square are people in New York State. And so that is ultimately where a lot of this opportunity exists for upstate in terms of the supply chain. I think it's manufacturing and cultivation, it's delivery, it's logistics. It's some of the stuff that New York has already been doing for the past 200, 300 years. except now with the cannabis plant. And so I think, the steepest learning curve is going to be on the cultivation side, but the stuff, the jobs and the opportunities in business with regards to delivery, warehousing, co-packing, manufacturing, extraction, New Yorkers know how to do that stuff, especially folks in Rensselaer County. And so I think that it really is a matter of replicating the success a lot of these areas have had in industry and other industries with the cannabis plant.
Yeah,
So
and I'll add to that. Rensselaer County, as everyone knows, has a very strategic location in all of this because you can't go out state lines. We're 2 hours north of New York City, 5 hours west of Buffalo, and we're the intersecting point between I-90 and 87. So at some point, those products will be, if they're going to New York City or Buffalo, they're going to be coming through our county.
Tyler?
Yeah, I would just add to that, it's kind of a unique spin on kind of our agricultural history as a county, and thinking about some of the more rural eastern parts of the county and how they could really benefit from it as well. So I think we have a lot of the infrastructure set up there. And as you look throughout the rest of the state, maybe some of the more rural areas throughout Western New York might not have the critical infrastructure required for some of these facilities. So I think that's an important piece to point out as well.
I also was doing a little looking as far as the opt-out, whether or not the municipalities within the county were deciding to opt out or not. And in looking at Rensselaer County, I mean, it seemed that predominantly the municipalities were participating. So that must mean that there's some support here in the county that really wants to see it be successful, especially in the city of Troy. So there was only a few actually that I saw that looked like they were deciding not to go in that direction, which was nice to see.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So there was only 4 municipalities that totally opted out, which were Berlin, Hoosick, Sand Lake, and Valley Falls. There were a few municipalities that opted out just on consumption sites, but they have the ability to opt back in once the regulations are promulgated.
So we may have piqued some interest of some of our participants on the webinar about how would they get started? What is the starting point for an existing business that thinks they could add this as a line of business, or someone just completely starting new? Where is the starting point?
Yeah, great question. And it's one that a lot of New Yorkers have had. And, I think that, it really is a matter of first learning what the supply chain for cannabis is. You follow the seed all the way till it's sold into a packaged product at a dispensary. There's an infinite amount of opportunity in the ancillary space, so not plant touching and plant touching activities that follow that plant all the way down from a grow room all the way to a store. And, it's not about doing it all, because no one's going to be able to do it all unless you're, a VC backed, $1 billion cannabis company. It's about identifying the places within that plant moving from, seed to sale that you can add value. If you have delivery expertise in trucks, there's a delivery license in the MRTA. And the delivery license actually limits which companies can get a license. You have to have less than 25 employees. So what does that mean? It means it's really amenable to small businesses, big companies there, and there are huge delivery cannabis companies all over the country cannot come to New York. There's little tweaks like that in the MRTA, and I suggest everyone, get a good look at that and look up some analysis from some of the law firms on YouTube about that. But the MRTA really incentivizes small operators to get into this space, in fulfillment, warehousing, delivery, logistics, security. All of these dispensaries will need full-time security on site. They'll need camera installation. They'll need the greenhouses and the commercial warehouses that are growing will need electricians to install all those lights and maintain them. The second you start studying how this industry works in other states, you can start to see very plug and play opportunities for existing businesses across the state.
Yeah, I think what Damian is saying on the education side and just knowing the industry and If you're new and you have an idea that you want to be part of the industry and you haven't been involved before, I mean, there's a lot of education, there's a lot to learn. So there's the typical business concepts that you have to kind of go through as far as your business plan and looking through how you're going to make it work. But a lot of it comes down to, do you understand enough about the industry itself? And that's where it seems like a lot of time has to be spent to really get that knowledge and talk to people who have done it elsewhere and are doing it now. And you got to pull those people in to help you. And then we find people approaching us just trying to make sure they can lock up who are the people they want to work with. And that's where, you know, the professionals on this call and others, they're building teams of people to kind of help support them move forward. And that's really what we're seeing.
Mark, I understand there's a pre-application. Can you or anyone else speak to that process and how quickly people need to act?
So we're getting calls on a weekly basis to, you know, as to what the status is of, you know, the application process. We're waiting for the regulations to come out. We've heard, you know, end of January, we doubt that's going to happen, but there was a informal announcement about that. So right now, what we're counseling our clients on is, like Matt said, identifying your project. What do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? Find the real estate location if it's a real estate based license. Talk to the municipality, make sure they support your project, and putting your professional team together from legal, government relations, marketing, and accounting.
Yeah. So, and in this pre-application, in theory, what is that allowing you to do? So you've chosen.
Well, yeah. So if you check all those boxes, you're in. Once the application process comes out, we'll be in good shape. We'll have the people in place to, you know, complete your application relatively quickly. Talk to the right people about your application and streamline that process, as opposed to having a, you know, stop and start because you haven't addressed an aspect of the application ahead of time.
And ultimately what you're applying for is a license, correct?
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about what that will look like, and are there infinite number of licenses being issued?
Yes, so the MRTA, first and foremost, provides for 9 licenses from, you know, wholesale to retail, and 2 are in between, going from, you know, a nursery, which is, you know, basically producing seeds and clones and things of that nature, to cultivators who are actually growing the plants. Cultivators can then, you know, sell their plants to distributors and processors, who are all on the wholesale side, as well as cooperative and micro businesses licenses. And then on the retail side, there's a retail license, which is a dispensary, and a delivery service, which can deliver from the retail locations to directly to consumers, and on consumption site license, which you can consume on site. So there's, as Damian alluded to, there's, you know, restrictions as to what you can and cannot do for each license, how many licenses you can hold. You know, you can't hold multiple licenses across the board. So it allows for multiple, you know, more people to participate in the industry. For example, you know, Damian referenced the delivery license, and there's, you know, a restriction on having 25 employees. Well, you only can have 1 delivery license, and that's it. So there's going to be multiple opportunities to have multiple delivery services, and, you know, and then I'll promote competition and give more people the ability to participate. With that said, you know, in order, they're very sought after licenses. One, because the MRTA has already stated that in the legislation that their goal is to give 50% of the licenses to social equity applicants. Social equity applicants are people who have been victims of the war on drugs, being, you know, put behind bars for participating in the cannabis industry in the past. They have, they're financially less than I think 80% of the average in the county they reside in, and where they live has been historically been victims of the war on drugs. That last part is yet to be seen from a definition standpoint as to what communities those are. We're going to find that out in the regulations. And then the secondary is, they're giving a priority to minority and women-owned businesses, disabled veterans, and distressed farmers. So there's a priority structure already in place in the MRTA. So there's going to be some significant competition on the application process. And so that's why, for your initial question, we recommend that you start doing some work now, so that when the application process starts, you're ready to go.
I just want to jump in here because it's important to convey that, at the New York Growers and Processors Association, we get calls daily from businesses in California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. They're all coming here. New York is the most lucrative cannabis economy potentially in the country, and that rivals California. And so a lot of the people who've been in cannabis for 10 years in their states, learned the industry, are relocating families to New York State for this opportunity to compete in our cannabis industry. And so that's something that, we aren't too excited about. We think that this opportunity is for, family farms, family businesses, legacy New Yorkers who we really want to see take advantage of the opportunity. And that's why events like this are important. More networking events like this are important to get that message out. And I think, ultimately the licenses are going to be limited, very limited. If you look at states, other states that have implemented this program, like they usually limit dispensary licenses, for example, to one for every, 25,000 residents. There won't be more than 1,500 dispensaries across the state, ever. And so they start to become a little bit like taxi cab medallions. And there are downsides to that, but there are also upsides if you're lucky enough to win one. But if you look at what New Jersey just did, New Jersey just opened their application period a few weeks ago. I believe within the first 24 hours of them opening applications, they got close to 1,000 applications. I don't know what they're at now, but they should probably reach 10,000 applications by the time the application period is closed. If that's New York, you have to triple that. And then they're going to hand out maybe 500 to 1,000 licenses in the first year, another 500 to 1,000 the second year. So it's going to be a slow process of rolling out licensing. And this is all speculation, of course. We don't actually know what the Cannabis Control Board is going to do, but understand that there will be intense competition for the licenses. Probably less so on the cultivation side. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for as many people who want to grow the plant as possible. But when you start talking about retail, that stuff is very tightly controlled.
So this sounds like a very overwhelming process to even just understand and get started. And we haven't even really scratched the surface on the financial piece and the tax implications. Matt, can you talk about, your top 3 recommendations just to get people less overwhelmed, more comfortable with the opportunity that they're presented right now?
Yeah, so I think what's important, like any other business, is you really have to go through and determine what your business plan is. And with that, you have to think about the licenses and how you're going to be able to, what licenses are you looking to try to obtain? What's possible or what could be probable. And putting together that plan is to make sure that you have a sense of, okay, well, financially, what's the impact? What are the cash flows? How am I going to raise the money? Depending on the type of license, how much is it going to cost to just start the business? What type of capital improvements? What type of money do I have to put into the facility or the property? It's thinking about whether or not you can do that on your own, or you have to begin to seek outside investors for help. And then you need to think about how you're going to structure the deal as far as the hard assets that you're looking to acquire, or if you're building something, or you have to find a facility to rent. It's really looking at the plan and the projections. And to do those projections, you really need to know what you're talking about. So you need to really have the expertise to understand what those cash flows really look like. I mean, you may have a sense of what you think they may look like, or you could do some research online and trying to identify what might be out there. But the bottom line is you got to really, again, goes back to talking to people who have done it, who know what the likelihood of success is. And you got to build into that also the risk that's involved in the cash flows. So really, it's you may have this idea that you want to move in a certain direction, but I really think it's important to put together that plan. And again, understand how the money will be made and how the investors will, whether it's yourself or your family and friends or those outside investors, will benefit from this investment. From a tax perspective, I mean, there's a lot of considerations as far as, what you're going to be able to deduct, given that cannabis is, a Schedule I drug, and there's limitations as to what you can deduct for federal tax purposes. I mean, people have talked about, you'll hear people talking about 280E section in the IRS code, really limits what you can deduct. I'm not going to get into the details of how you do those calculations, because there's also a good amount of case law and interpretation too, as far as which accountant you're talking to. So I think just to give you a general sense is you have limitations for deductions to what the product costs. So from a dispensary standpoint, you could be limited to what the cost of the product is that you're trying to sell. And what people don't understand is you could have a significant tax burden that is derived from the income that you're generating from the business. And if you don't structure it properly, so if you have, people sometimes jump into, let's create an LLC, or should I create a corporation? I mean, there's structuring considerations you have to think about, but you don't want that tax burden to somehow all of a sudden impact you personally, and you have to pay these taxes. So you want to protect yourself from that exposure. So really what's now is going back to the team. You got to have someone who looks through, if I'm looking to buy or to buy property, to have a dispensary as a business, you got to know you got to look at really what's that cash flow going to look like, and talk to people on your team that know how that's going to work, and all the costs that are involved in operations and the tax impact. So, I mean, it's a big endeavor. I think it's a little overwhelming, but you can't just say you want to move, you want to start this business. I mean, there's a lot of legwork that's involved.
You discussed the opportunity or your suggestion that someone create a business plan. We all know that good business plans consider where the competition in the market lives. And it would be easy to think about that competition existing among other regulated, licensed growers and distributors. But can we talk for a minute from all of your different perspectives about the competition that is created with the unregulated market?
Yeah, and it is something that we talk about at the association every day, and we talk about it with regulators. We talk about it and I will give you an example. We talk to legacy growers in New York State, people who have been growing cannabis in this state and selling it for the last 10, 20 years. They're actually prioritized as well to move into the regulated market. We're introducing them to regulators, state politicians. We want there to be a conversation there. We don't want a situation where we're arresting people for growing a plant again, because that is not where we want to go. We want a lot of these, and they're young people who are growing in houses, in outdoors, upstate, all over the place. And really all they were doing was meeting market demand. They saw a business opportunity, they took it. And so what we really want to do is introduce them to concepts like taxes, like HR. There's a lot of compliance stuff that they need to be brought up to speed on. They understand how to turn a 5 cents into 10 cents. They understand profit margins. They understand the basic ideas of commerce. What they don't understand is state compliant capitalism, where it's like you have all these requirements you have to fulfill in order for your business to succeed. And we really do need to bring them into the regulated market, because right now they're growing and selling what people in New York City and New York State want to consume. And if we create a regulated market without them, and we're competing, the taxes and all the other compliant things make our prices higher, the customers aren't going to be there for us at the end of the day. And so I really do believe it's about incorporating them. It's about transitioning what is now, because to be completely honest, New Yorkers are already spending billions of dollars on cannabis. We're just not spending it and giving it to the farms and the manufacturing businesses that already operate in the state. We're sending it to California. We're sending it to Maine. We're sending it to Oklahoma, Oregon, all these states that are, sending us their unlicensed, unregulated cannabis. And we want to start diverting a lot of that money and that spending to farms in this state, dairy farms, a lot of struggling hemp farms, and some manufacturing jobs as well. And so I think it's not essentially a conversation about how do we stop the unregulated market. It's like, how do we bring them on in a way that's, sustainable and beneficial to the industry as a whole.
And initially, just to piggyback on, initially, the unregulated market is not going to go away right away. And we saw it in California. Over time, it will, but initially, there's going to be a strong competition there because they're able to produce the product cheaper.
I'll add one more thing. I talked to a kid in the Bronx, not a kid, he's like in his 30s, but he's been growing cannabis in an apartment in the Bronx for the last 10 years. He's a veteran. He came, this is just one story of a lot of these guys. He's a veteran. He came back in 2013 from Afghanistan and had some issues with PTSD and started growing cannabis to self-medicate essentially. Found out that he started to really enjoy growing cannabis. 2 plants became 8, became 10, became 20. And then, people started buying it from him, and he started a business that way. He raises his daughter by himself, and this is the business that pays for his apartment, pays for his livelihood, and he also grows an incredible product that people all over the Bronx want to buy from him. And so it really is a question of how do we give that guy the tools to now have a business, that a business that he can go to a bank with, that he can share with his community. A lot of these guys have been in hiding for a long time, and they've been, there's been a lot of stigma and shame around what they do. How do we get them to be proud of what they do? Because what they actually have achieved is they've become really good growers, and they taught themselves how to grow plants under very difficult circumstances. And so we want that talent in our industry. That's part of the innovation that New York will bring to the space. And I think the customers will want that, and the communities will want that as well.
So reflecting on an individual grower, whether it's in the regulated or unregulated market, growing in their apartment in the Bronx makes me think about space and place. And in our quest to achieve social equity through business opportunities and policy, that brings up a lot of feelings and opinions among our neighbors. Tyler, can you talk about any space and place conversations that you're hearing in the industry around any of the, not next to me, please don't put that here, I don't want that, or yes, please, that's amazing. Anything you're getting in the vibe of the real estate world?
Yeah, so I'd say, already there's a lot of misnomers about the industry and preconceived notions associated with it. So I think some communities have opted out, and for their own individual reasons. I think it was either Damian or Mark mentioned, I think there was 4 total communities that opted out within Rensselaer County, and others throughout upstate New York. With that being said, this is going to be a highly regulated industry. So I think everybody has to be aware of that. and those zoning practices that would be in place for any other types of industrial type uses would be relevant in this situation as well. So I think some of those initial concerns that people present will be mitigated once all the regulations are completely rolled out and announced. With that being said, I mean, I think there's aspects of Rensselaer County where you talk about maybe the more rural parts of Rensselaer County for outdoor grow facilities, and then the more urban areas for other opportunities. And I know one comment we brought up was opportunity zones. So there's certain opportunity zones throughout Rensselaer County which present tremendous opportunity to locate within the county. And then also I think the other economic impact that we maybe have glossed over throughout the conversation is the taxation component, and what the broader economic impact will be, not only to New York State from that, but also the local towns and the county as well from the sales component.
Mark, did you have something to add to that conversation from the legal perspective, and any pushback you're getting from communities who have opted in?
No, I think the overarching impression that I get is that the municipalities are waiting for the regulations to come out to see how their zoning is going to be affected.
Yeah. So there's a lot of hurry up and wait here. And
Right.
we know that this has years and years and years of history behind it, and working to achieve social equity through policy, as we've reflected on, can be really complicated. And I know that I've peeked at some of the questions, and some folks would like to hear more about that social equity piece, specific to the community building end of things, where entire communities have been disinvested over time as industries have moved on, and how you might reflect on the opportunity that were presented here.
Yeah, and I think what's incredibly encouraging about what New York is doing, and this is something to understand about this issue nationwide, is every other state no other state has ever put social equity at the beginning of their building their industry. California, Oregon, Michigan, Chicago, even Illinois. I mean, they're all trying to backpedal and now implement social equity tools and procedures into their legal cannabis industries after they've been legal for 5, 3, 10 years. And it's very difficult to do. LA, like Los Angeles, just saw, the first Black woman who owned a dispensary happened this year. And they've had a legal industry for 7 years now. And so what New York has identified, correctly, is that this is a lot easier to do if they start the industry off in a fair and just way and targeted way than if they, just get it going quickly and then try and do it later. And so there is a significant opportunity for distressed farmers, for over-policed zip codes. Some of these licenses will be handed out based on, how long you've lived in a certain zip code. And there will also be targeted investments from some of the tax dollars generated from the sale of cannabis into organizations that work with these communities, with the formerly incarcerated, homeless populations. From my perspective, I work at a nonprofit. We are building out a workforce development initiative that will ideally one day be funded by a lot of the tax dollars generated from cannabis. And so, if you're in spaces that economic development spaces, nonprofit work, workforce development, job training, like there are a number of opportunities. This industry definitely needs your activity in it, because it's never been done in kind of this focused and inclusive way at the beginning of an industry. And this is a $5-10 billion industry. And so there's going to be a multitude of opportunities for nonprofits, community organizations to plug into that and have impact. And so if you're thinking about doing that kind of work, I would encourage you to reach out to the association, to me directly. I mean, there's a ton of nonprofits that I'm trying to encourage to get into the space. And I would say, just to close on that, one of the reasons you don't see a lot of nonprofit work in this space is that federal classification of cannabis threatens it indirectly, kind of threatens the 501c3 status of a lot of nonprofits, which means obviously you cannot grow or sell cannabis, but that doesn't mean you can't help people get jobs in cannabis. It doesn't mean you can't, work with formerly incarcerated people to get them prepared to start a business in cannabis. And there will be a lot of funding from the state, Department of Labor, Empire State Development for efforts around making this industry more inclusive.
Yeah, to piggyback that, Governor Hochul recently announced that as part of her State of the State that she wants to establish a $200 million private public fund for this social equity program. The services are likely to include, business consulting, workforce training, other professional services, as well as funding. It's been thrown out there that there's going to be 0% loans given to these social equity applicants, and that's a huge step forward for these individuals.
Yeah, and I think we as a state really need to understand how unbelievable that is, that how the transition the state has made from locking people up for this to now loaning them money to start cannabis businesses. That doesn't just happen. That hasn't happened in other states really. And we're fortunate to have a governor that's shown that kind of leadership to really put that forward. And so, someone else asked in the chat about the license, the cost for applying or whatever. If you're social equity, there's not really going to be a cost probably associated with applying for these licenses. There's going to be a lot of financing in place to support all the steps you'll need to get compliant to get a license.
So I'm sure that all of our participants now are writing down your name and looking up your contact information. But let's be honest, the four of you you don't have enough hours in your day to serve as the only team in this space. So where would you point folks to seek additional team members beyond this amazing group? Is there a resource page? How would they start to build a team, as you've said, which is so important to getting started?
I don't mean to plug our association, but our association is, one of the biggest, is the biggest cannabis association in the state. We do a lot of public networking events. We have people on the ground in all these different counties coordinating their activities, doing meetups, talking about licensing, talking about applying. I would also plug the SUNY schools. There are a lot of great SUNY programs that have cannabis schools, courses, and professors and graduates and organizations associated with those programs. There actually, interestingly enough, are no CUNY schools in the city that teach cannabis, but there are 12 upstate. So I would also encourage people to look at those programs if they're looking for more information. Industry associations, community colleges, SUNY schools. And then obviously, there is going to be a much more targeted educational campaign, investment in education and public outreach and incubators from the state. They're going to be the primary drivers here once they get their, the budgeting in place and the funding in place for hiring building out the kind of operation that can really promote understanding, knowledge, resources to folks who are interested in the space.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's this group, like the group we have here. I mean, as far as, I know, this attorney, I have Mark here that you could talk to that I've worked with before. If you're looking for real estate, it's a whole person, it's the networking that we're all doing behind the scenes. Is we're meeting with a lot of people, trying to gather who the people are that know what they're talking about, and then trying to find someone that you can trust. And once you find that first person, kind of build off that to build that team of trust, you can really get people to collaborate. From our firm's perspective, we have a lot of what we're doing in New York is we're trying to leverage what we've done in other states, which a lot of us here in this group are also doing. And we'll start a conversation, but then the next step is really to get someone on the phone who's done it before. And that's been a big help. So you can do some research to see, who has been through this before and that experience. And again, just getting that comfort level and trust And then all of a sudden things open up. And you know, to add to Damian, I mean, one of the biggest help for me has been really part of the association participation and listening to people who actually do this on a day-to-day basis. You learn a lot. So, and they're very open to, you know, as far as the membership, you can learn a lot from participating.
I know I've learned so much just in the few times that I've been in your company now, and having the team, all of the different perspectives represented has helped me understand, you know, it's vast. It has a lot of pieces and parts to it, and really digging in and starting to do research from all different perspectives, I think is the best starting point. You know, and always, anytime you're building a team, certainly building it with folks you can trust and ask any question and you feel confident you're going to get an answer or a connection to somebody who has the answer. So I agree. Mark, did you want to add anything on the team of from the legal perspective?
I mean, I'll piggyback what Matt said. You know, we're not only, you know, taking calls from potential clients, but we're also taking calls from, you know, other professionals and other professions to create a team for a potential applicant. And so when you call one of us, we already may have people in place that you can go to, you know, for accounting or for marketing or for government relations. So we streamline the process for you.
So we do have a number of questions, and I think we originally planned to stop the panel at 10, but based on the number of questions, I'd like to just start asking you some of those questions that have popped up. First, we have Eric asking, what efforts and initiatives are you thinking about for business incubation? Are there any that you've heard of? And I think you've discussed some of them, Damian, in New York City, but are you hearing of anything in Rensselaer County or the Capital Region?
Yeah, there will be incubators all over the state. So it's actually included in the MRTA that the state will establish incubators. You know, they're not necessarily state-run incubators, but they will be state-funded. So for example, like Finger Lakes Community College could become an incubator for cannabis businesses. They will receive state funding to support cannabis businesses in that area. You know, I want to build, our nonprofit is working to build an incubator in the South Bronx to help businesses there. Incubators will be a big part of this industry. I also think not only will they be doing, you know, business services, compliance and training, education, there will also be, you know, graduates of incubators may have an easier path to getting licensed. And so they'll be very good community resources for getting local businesses licensed and trained up and compliant. Unfortunately, you know, those, they just roll out differently. They'll roll out a little bit later than the rest of the industry because there's going to be an RFP process that the state probably has to implement, by which, you know, SUNY schools, community colleges, nonprofits will have to apply to be incubators. There'll be a 6-month process to win the funding and the contract, and so those will be coming, and they're a big part of the MRTA.
And have we heard anything about the impact of this movement in reservations? We know that in New York State we have such a presence of reservations, and I understand that legally there's a different relationship. Can you talk to that, Mark, or anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, reservations are separate and apart, right? So, you know, it's hard to say how they're going to be impacted by this. I know that there's activity, you know, legacy activity going on these reservations. And so, you know, I would hope that, you know, New York legislators will try to bring them on board so that they're not competing with the regulated industry.
Just making sure.
Yeah, I've just heard that, you know, people that I work with who are doing consultation, you know, there's definitely movements where the reservations are seeking that assistance and they're getting it. That's about all I know, though, at this point.
There's a question here that I may need help with. What are your thoughts on transitioning Solocybe out of the underground to a regulated market? And the word is PSILOCYB.
Yes, psilocybin.
I got it. Okay.
Nice. Mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. So it's not psychedelics are not my area of expertise, but that definitely is the next phase of decriminalization and legalization for hallucinogenics and other psychoactive compounds. And I'm not a professional in that space, but I know that there's been a lot of movement in the medical community studying, their benefits for treating PTSD and depression and anxiety. And so I'm excited that the research is being done. I mean, this is what's super frustrating about cannabis, mushrooms, even ecstasy, which they're now using to treat PTSD, is that because we've criminalized these compounds, we've prevented universities from studying them. And so we don't even know what they do. And so whenever someone tells you that cannabis is bad for this or good for that, it's very difficult for them to say any of these things because we haven't let our universities get funded to study them. And that's just a shame because there's a lot of people who could have benefited from the medical research and from the people who are suffering. And so I wish I had more answers about psilocybin, but I know that that's moving forward a lot at a much quicker pace on the West Coast, obviously, than it is over here. And I know it's legal now in Portland, but yeah.
I think what's really important to bring into this conversation as well, and you've just alluded to it, Damian, is the addictions industry and how much support is needed there. And in our planning call, we did talk about how the unregulated market is unregulated and is often including unexpected ingredients and overdoses and whatnot. And can any of you, speak to this value added of having a more regulated market? Just saying a little bit more, any of you, about the positive impact potentially? Yeah,
I will say that there's value obviously in a regulated market. You want to know what you're putting into your body, flat out. I will say that there's also a ton of stuff there's going to be a ton of stuff that says like, oh, this cannabis might be laced with something. There's nobody lacing cannabis with anything. There are a lot of harmful drugs that are brought into the state all the time that we need to stop. But unregulated cannabis is not sprayed with fentanyl. These are stories that I think are propagated in the media for clicks. But the cannabis that's actually consumed in New York State, comes from a greenhouse in Vermont. It comes from Maine. It comes from indoor facility in California. It isn't. There's no reason to spray it with anything other than that. But I will say that like anything, like prohibition, when people were drinking bathtub bourbon, it is better for it to be regulated. If people are going to consume it, you want it to go through certain testing, and you want it to have certain compliant requirements for fertilizer and pesticides and all these other things. That's just what you would want before you put anything into your body. And so we should be encouraging states, federal government to legalize these things so that people in our community who are maybe using them for their own medical purposes or for recreational purposes are not risking their health and can do it safely. And so everyone should care about a well-regulated and safe market.
We have a lot of questions about the actual price of the application, and I know that may be different depending on the social equity applicants and others. Can we say a little bit more about that fee structure?
Right now, we were waiting for the regulations to provide those details, as well as what's going to be required as part of the application. But based on other states, there's a range based on the license you're getting. It's going to be thousands of dollars, but at the end of the day, if you end up getting one of these licenses, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, I'll add to that, you know, it's not going to be expensive for social equity applicants to apply, but you know, if it is thousands of dollars to apply for a retail license, you're not social equity, you know, you're applying to essentially build a $5 million business. So a couple, you know, $5,000 is a drop in the bucket, and it's just an operating expense. But I will say that, you know, when you picture the state opening these applications up, you also have to picture people in a room reading these applications. And the human resources lift that the state's going to have to, you know, the amount of people they're going to have to hire to read everyone's 50, 100-page, you know, application is a lot. And so I think that's where the fee structure kind of comes in, because this stuff has to be funded.
And do we have any sense, if we look at the surrounding states, about the full application process from pre-application to being issued a license, how long that will take? Or is that really dependent on how quickly people get through the process?
Yeah, it's a very fact intensive question. It's you know, based on, you know, how complete your application is when you submit it. You know, what's the, you know, turnaround time with the state, and if there's any, you know, follow-up that we need. When we did a medical application, I believe it was I think almost a year before from submitting to actually getting a decision on our application. But that was vertically integrated. It was from, you know, grow, you know, seed to sale. So it shouldn't be that as long as that process.
There is a lot of technical interest around this process, and I would definitely say that I see an opportunity here for the chamber, for other groups, to continue these conversations. A specific question, and I don't know if any of you know the answer: if you're denied the license, do you get your money back if you were not applying under a social equity application?
In other states, no, you do not get your money back.
Sure.
Which is pretty crazy to think about. Pennsylvania, for example, I think it was $200,000 to apply for a medical cannabis license, and you didn't get the money back. And you know, 700 people applied and 12 businesses got the licenses. That will not happen in New York, by the way. That's just an example of how crazy it used to be. But yeah, I don't believe you will get your fee back if you. But again, speculation. Everybody, regulations have not come out yet. We will all have more information in a month to 2 months from now.
Here's a really interesting legal question. What liability does an on-site consumption location have in regards to impaired drivers?
Oof, that's a heavy question.
Yeah, you know, I would say you're going to have a similar liability to what a bar has.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have insurances in place, and things of that nature. But you know, we'll see what the state requires to operate you know, one of these types of facilities, and that'll give us a clearer picture as to what the potential liabilities may be.
And turning our attention to the workforce development piece, Brian Williams, who is the commissioner of all things employment with Rensselaer County, has chimed in asking, much of the workforce training programs in New York State are federally funded. So because of federal laws, access to those training funds are not able to be used to train new employees in the field. Are there any other sources of funding New York State is looking at to help us scale the folks for this industry?
Great question, and absolutely. And this is probably where I've done most of my research so far, because working at a workforce development nonprofit. I actually ended up spending a lot of time talking to the workforce development community in California, trying to get a better sense of how they navigate this issue. Because we also get federal funds. We are also anticipating a lot more federal funds in the future for green jobs and we don't want to risk that by, you know, dipping our toe into cannabis. This has not been a problem in other workforce development industries in California and other states, in Colorado. You can both prepare people for job training opportunities in cannabis and receive federal funding. The IRS is simply is very focused on companies that sell, distribute, and retail cannabis. Those companies will not be allowed to have 501c3 status, but you can do advocacy, you can do job training, workforce development, business incubation. As far as funding goes, the state, the federal government will obviously not fund any, training in cannabis, but the state will, and the state has publicly stated that they will be putting money behind that effort. Understandably, no one in New York State, technically speaking, should know how to grow and sell cannabis. And so someone's got to teach them how to do it. And the only actor, good faith actor with the kind of funding and scale that could do that is the state of New York. And so look for announcements from the Department of Labor. I know that the Workforce Development Institute and Cornell are working with the state right now on workforce development. Unions are very much involved in that conversation as well. But we're anticipating there being a lot of funding for job training in cannabis.
Here's a really great question. Similar, where do you recommend a small business consultant like Teresa asking the question that engages with communities impacted by the criminalization of cannabis start? Many of her clients have businesses in places that could expand into an ancillary area to support the industry.
So can you repeat the question?
Yes. Where do you recommend a small business consultant that engages with communities impacted by the criminalization of cannabis start? So many of her clients have businesses in places that could expand into ancillary areas to support this industry.
Okay. I guess I just don't understand this. So is she asking for, resources to get into the cannabis space?
Let's start there. And I think you've alluded to some of that, but this is specific to some of her clients that she's working with. So it would be some support to individuals she's working with professionally.
Well, like Damian said, where I think we're continuing to plug the association, but, the association is a great resource. They have a variety of different members, and it's a very diverse membership from people who are currently, participating in the industry, touching the plant, to providing, professional services that support the industry. So trade associations, your CUNY and SUNY would be a good start for resources.
I would also say that, like a lot of other industries in New York, there's going to be incentives for cannabis businesses to contract out MWBE licensed businesses. In this case, I believe she's talking about the ancillary area. So maybe individuals who could do security, who could do electric work, who could do construction work. I can't understate how many opportunities there are in the ancillary space for, someone's got to build all these greenhouses, someone's got to do the electrical work, there's really complicated water systems that have to be managed for a lot of these facilities. And obviously there's, I'll give you an example of an ancillary business I recently was telling a community about in Harlem, actually. But, when you go into some of these cultivation rooms, indoor or a greenhouse, you have to be wearing clean suits from head to toe that have your name and badge and all this other stuff on them, and they have to be washed at the end of every day, so you don't bring in particulars or whatever from outside into the plant room. And so companies typically will pick them up and drop them off on a day-to-day basis, and that's just that's $1 million business in a thriving cannabis market. And there are a lot of businesses like that can be replicated across the state.
So let's switch things up. There's some tax implication questions, and I think we hit on this, but I'm going to ask the question to make sure there's nothing we want to add. Obviously, small businesses cannot afford these fees. Will recreation fees, and do we even know that yet?
Can you say that again, Christine, just because you just
Yes.
cut out
Small
there
bus-
for a second?
Sure. Will recreational facilities be taxed similarly to the of small businesses associated with this? Do we even know what the tax structure is like?
Well, the issues with the tax structure is until when you start, you're starting a business and you would follow the same rules as any other business when you're starting a business. The issue is when you're actually moving forward with the cannabis license, and when you're awarded the license, then there's a question of, okay, what type of business is this now? Because it's now we're running a cannabis business. So there's going to be expenses that are incurred in the beginning that you may not get the benefit for in the future, because if you're unable to deduct those expenses in the future, when you become a cannabis business upon the licensing, you don't necessarily have the same benefits that you would have if you were a different type of business. So there's definitely a question of what do you do now until you get the license? And there are going to be limitations. It's like any other business when you start it, whether or not you could deduct any of those expenses. It's just you may never be able to deduct them in the future.
Oh, it looks like Christine might have dropped. Uh-oh. I can moderate. Yeah, I can read a few questions while we wait for her to come back. Is that all right, Alicia?
Absolutely. Thank you for stepping in.
No problem. New York State's medical cannabis application fee and license fees were $10,000 and $200,000 yearly. Mark, I don't actually know if that's true. What are the yearly fees for medical licensed companies?
I'm not entirely sure what they are now, but when we initially applied, it was $1 million deposit, and they would keep it if you were awarded, and then if you weren't awarded, you were refunded $750,000. But I don't know what the current license fees are.
I do know that the medical cannabis companies have higher fees just because they have much bigger businesses. Like they have,
Yeah, they're vertically integrated.
Yeah. Should startups file their business entity in New York, or will a Delaware corp work also? Is one better than the other? If in Delaware, will that preclude any of the New York benefits?
It's unclear right now. You know, to be on the safe side at this point, if you want to form an LLC before the regulations come out, we recommend doing it in New York because you know, based on the MRTA, it looks like they're promoting New York interests, and so you want to stay in New York.
Yeah, that's what we've been seeing as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Curtis Barkman has asked, made the point to say, Wayne Schaff Associates has several years experience building dispensaries, cultivation facilities, and processing facilities. We can assist and provide consulting for businesses looking to enter the market from a design and construction perspective. And see, that's a great example of you know, a business, a local business or area business that can benefit from this. There's a lot of facility design work that goes into this. I've been helping a few association members locate facility design consultants for greenhouses in the Rochester area. Because if you are going to build a greenhouse for cannabis, you really want to know, you really want to speak to a consultant, design consultant who can tell you how many square footage you want in this room and what you want in that room. And it's not like tomatoes and other plants. And so facility design, especially for processing and growing is a huge thing. It costs a lot of money, but there should be businesses, I think, that are available locally that can do that work. Mark, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to piggyback on the design thing. There's also, you know, air filtration, you know, as part of the indoor, if you're going to do cultivation in the indoor facility, that needs to be considered as well from a design perspective.
Where do we find information regarding those local municipalities that have opted in? I believe the Rockefeller Institute has a live tracker, Mark.
They do. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, yeah, so the Rockefeller Institute has a live tracker of all the municipalities.
and they have a map, but they also, you know, provide filters for, you know, specific counties and municipalities if you want to filter down from the state level.
One attendee asked about access to the recording after this. Alicia, is it going to be available?
I will have to look into it to see what the chamber's policy is,
Okay.
but it will go to Mark.
Okay. Damian hit the nail on the head with the federal status of cannabis limiting the opportunity with nonprofits. It is also very much impacting the financial market, lending, and insurance. How do the panelists think the industry can really develop with the limitations on the industry due to its federal classification as a Schedule I drug?
With the existing conflict, it's going to be difficult, right? I mean, there's bills, you know, that at the federal level that have been presented to get cannabis off of the controlled substance list. What I can say is, you know, in the states that have legalized, you know, cannabis, they've been able to operate and make money. So they're even though there is a conflict, there is avenues to operate efficiently and be financially successful.
Yeah, and there are financial institutions who are really exploring and trying to find an opportunity to participate, and there are some that are. I mean, the issue is how much they charge as far as cost. But if you talk to someone, you can probably find some type of connection with an opportunity. Same thing as it pertains to insurance. I think there are insurance companies that have come out and are trying to be pro cannabis. Again, people that you meet as part of these associations. So they're also trying to position themselves to be successful when the time is right. So I think it's definitely worth, again, talking to people and finding out who's out there.
Mm-hmm. I will say as a hemp farmer, I have had 4 different banks at this point. 2 of them were local New York banks. I now actually just, you know, recently opened up a bank account in Washington State. And so a lot of these are, you know, small, you know, state banks that agree to bank CBD and will eventually agree to bank THC. An example, though, of some of the costs associated with that is, you know, the bank I have in Washington State. Should my company grow THC and transition it to THC, you know, the fees are $800 a month for just having a checking and savings account. And so these are, you know, it's expensive and it's risky. I mean, the banks are taking a risk by working in cannabis, and so are the businesses, and so are the entrepreneurs, and that's just the nature of it. Unfortunately, you know, to the question you're kind of raising here is a lot of small actors are disadvantaged by the federal status of cannabis. Venture capital, you know, private equity, well-capitalized individuals who have a lot of cash on hand are very much, you know, advantaged in this scenario. They don't need loans from banks. You know, they don't need all this underwriting. They don't need all that activity. That's what small business and entrepreneurs do need. So unless you have access to, you know, large amounts of capital, it really is difficult to enter this space. And that's kind of why we see a lot of the, you know, the inequality and the lack of representation in the cannabis industry largely. I say this to people, I think that the finance sector is more diverse than the cannabis sector because they actually have, you know, they put time and energy and money into making that sector diverse, and cannabis really is kind of new, and it really hasn't had that, you know, that awakening yet. So it's a huge challenge. It's probably one of the biggest challenges in the space. And in my opinion, I do not see the federal government legalizing anytime soon. I mean, when we're struggling to get just an infrastructure bill passed, I feel like cannabis legalization is going to be a high hurdle for the federal government at this point, even though it's clear that that's what the country wants. Yeah. Next question is, for those who have joined late, can each of the presenters restate their affiliations and or website for your respective companies? I do believe that a lot of people weren't able to join in the introduction part. So if we do want to go down and just do like the brief introduction, Mark, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. My name is Mark Wagner. I'm a senior associate with the Wagner firm. We're an Albany business law firm with a cannabis practice, obviously. And you can reach me at mark@thewagnerfirm.com, and our website is www.thewagnerfirm.com.
Tyler, you want to go next?
Sure. Tyler Culberson with NAI Platform Commercial Real Estate here in Albany. I'm an industrial broker here in the Capital Region and specialize in large industrial facilities. So for anybody looking for larger facilities, that would be my area of expertise. My website is naiplatform.com, and you can get any of my contact information there.
And my name is Matt Vanderbeck. I'm a partner with UHY, and I've had the cannabis practice for our firm here in the Capital Region, Hudson Valley region. And you can find information about me and the firm on our website, UHY LLP. And we have a cannabis page, and you can kind of go through that.
Fantastic. My name is Damian Fagan. I am a board member with the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. We're the largest cannabis industry association in the state. We are recruiting new members. We are helping people get ready for applications. We are getting farmers up to speed on how to grow cannabis generally, how to grow top shelf flower, how to transition your existing farm operations to cannabis. We are mostly comprised of a lot of hemp farmers, but now increasingly retailers, sponsors like Matt and Mark, and we're growing very quickly. And we encourage anyone who's interested in the cannabis industry to look us up, nycgpa.org. And the last question, we answered all of them. Congratulations, everybody. There are a lot of unique insurance regulations too. Our agency at NFP currently insures over 275 dispensaries in 30 states and over 6.8 million square feet of cultivation. Happy to lend advice in this space. Feel free to reach out. That's Mike Murray. His contact information there is in the question Q&A section. So you can reach out to him there. And thank you to the chamber, and thank you to Christine, who lost momentarily, but I do want to thank all the panelists and Alicia as well for hosting this, and for everyone coming out for this conversation.
I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the panel. Christine, our moderator, who unfortunately was kicked off Zoom for whatever reason. And I'd like to thank Mark and the Wagner firm for putting on this enlightening webinar on cannabis, because cannabis is here to stay and will only get larger, that market. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.